Is switching to Linux a mistake? One tech journalist seems to think so. But we'll go ahead and have a look at his argument and see if there's any truth behind there. Thanks for checking out this video by Switch to Linux. If you like this type of content, subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. Leave us a like and a comment down below. Of course, we will be talking about switching to Linux. Is it a mistake or not? Is it like, it's such a hobby that I just don't have time for my other hobbies. I got to spend all my time keeping my machines up and running. I have no earthly idea what these people are talking about, outside of suggesting maybe try a better distribution. But therein lies the problem. If we go ahead and ask a lot of the older guys with graying beards like mine, what was your first Linux distribution? Most of us are probably going to say something like Ubuntu. And I would say it's not 100% of everybody, but it's pushing the upper 90s. And so as people might have moved off of Linux for a while, lived in the normie tech world, and then decide to come back, it makes obvious choice. Let's just download Ubuntu. The problem is, this isn't an opinion about Ubuntu, but on a technical level, Ubuntu has been getting worse. Some of it is GNOME. GNOME has been getting so bad, possibly because they seem to alienate everybody who knows code because they're all offended about anything and everything over there, and they want to recompile everything inside of Rust. And I'm not sure if you guys have tried to use the latest Tails, the 7 branch. Tails, anything in the 7 branch, is so bad, it is practically unusable. I think that's GNOME. It could be Debian, which does struggle from the same problems. I actually could not get Debian installed on one of my systems. I was trying to install it, and it did not recognize. I think it literally something inverted which disks to install things on, because I was 100% certain I select the right disk for installing the bootloader, and it wiped out the installation drive instead of installing it on the target drive. Okay, something weird was going on with that Debian installer at one point in time. I don't know if that's been fixed or not, and I don't know, maybe it was too late at night and I messed something up personally, but I have had problems with the latest Debian. But the latest Tails is an abomination. I think a lot of this has to do with a lot of the latest GNOME features, because I've seen some of this creep in a couple tiny places in Linux Mint. You see that? Force close or respond later. Basically, your program completely freezes. It's something based on GNOME, and your whole system freezes out. And then it gives you like, hey, this program's not responding. Would you like to force quit or please wait? And then I don't know why, but a lot of these modern systems, you hit force quit and it won't quit. You can go in and kill the application and it won't kill. It's weird. I think that happens to be something wrong in GNOME. Now, I've not played with Fedora enough on the GNOME branch to see if that's duplicated over there, but I know I've experienced it on Debian. I know I've experienced it on Tails. I know I've experienced it on Ubuntu, all based on modern GNOME. And so as we go back to the distributions we might have used the first time, we don't stop to think that maybe there is something indeed going wrong in some of these systems. But let's go ahead and have a look at the article here. I think this may have originally been published on the Verge, but of course the Verge is going like full paywall. So Geek Blog had the whole article listed, so we'll go ahead and read it from over there. So I went back to Linux and it was a mistake. So obviously he's talking about his Windows 11 computer is becoming so bad as to be unusable. He moved to an M1 MacBook Pro when Windows got bad, and he just decided he would take his old Dell XPS and install Linux on it. And therein was the problem. Now, I have not played with an XPS. I know there are a couple of odds and ends laptops that do have some problems on Linux. This is why if I'm meandering through a pawn shop and see a neat computer, I always take that model number of the computer and put Linux after it in the search engine. And then I see, are people saying how good or how bad it is with Linux in general, or a particular distribution in particular. Well, apparently the Dell XPS has some problems that I don't know. In fact, it might have been one that I was researching at one point in time because I was going into a pawn shop with the intention of buying a computer and installing Linux on it for a friend of mine. And we found one computer and it was a Dell. I'm like, ooh, this might be it. It may have been an XPS because I took the time in there to do just a couple keyword searches and find that there are some problems with the particular computer we looked at. So I opted to not buy that one and I went to buy a different computer instead. One that did not indicate any problems going online and typing in the model number followed by Linux. And so I end up buying the computer. Everything worked perfectly fine. And that generally has been my experience. I have had almost no problems with running Linux in general. A few distros here and there, a few things like Pop! OS are tied to the particular system processor you have. And so I have to remember if I downloaded that, did I download the Intel version or the AMD version? Because I have both Intel and AMD computers around here and I can't run it on the wrong computer. Then I have to consider, is it running in grub mode or UEFI mode, like legacy or UEFI? And because that will make a difference because my MSI computer can't load UEFI systems because of the processor. So I got to consider all of these factors. But when you know on some level these particular factors, it's not a problem. You just know that there are some cases which have these issues. But mainstream distributions like Linux Mint don't struggle with these problems. We are seeing things. I downloaded one. Was it the Lyra? I think I did a couple of videos with. That one was tied to the processor. Pop! OS is tied to the processor. Most Linux distributions you download are not. So he goes on here and mentions that there were some issues. Now, he's first going back to his old experience way back in 2006. So, Wi-Fi didn't work out of the box on the old computer, but he was able to get that work. He dual booted with Windows out of necessity and often had work issues on the MacBook on hand, but those were testing or specific things. So he said 99% of his life back then used Ubuntu. That was until about 2017, so about 9 years ago. He decided that he wanted to pursue other hobbies, and he decided that he was just going to go ahead and switch, I believe, to a Mac, he said. And then, of course, he was spending a lot of his time in Windows and other stuff as well. But he bought this XPS, and he bought the aforementioned XPS and switched over completely. So a lot has changed, and that was to Windows. So a lot has changed in 20 years, and even in the same 7 years since I last used it, it's now arguably the best platform for PC gaming. So he says, yeah, PC gaming, go with Linux, is what he's saying. He talks about good photo editing like Darktable and other commercial options for BWig and Reaper all have greatly improved. And then he goes down here and he talks about now he's going into modern times and he is going in and he's going to be talking about his attempt to install it with this XPS. And so he goes to try and install it, and he says, well, the interface is prettier, put the ISO on it, considered wiping the XPS completely, chickened out at last minute, decided to dual boot, which means repartitioning the hard drives. He says, right off the bat, reminded that Linux hasn't completely overcome its fiddly nature. Fingerprint reader didn't work. Minor annoyances I decided to ignore. So more concerning was that Ubuntu failed to install updates because of an EFI partition issue specific to the XPS that was also causing problems under Windows. So, okay, it's causing problems under Linux and under Windows. Maybe that's a problem with that particular computer. Okay, maybe that's one of the things that we want to keep in mind. So don't be blaming Linux when the Windows computer has the same problem. All right, so now Ubuntu also refused to mount my Windows partition for the first time, and then suddenly working. So it's possible that this is because the kernels had removed some of the drivers for some of the Windows file systems, and then eventually I think some of the distros put them back in. So that's probably the case. But admittedly, yes, if you don't know that, that could be a problem, but maybe that's an issue with dual booting. But again, Is that a major quirk? Is that like making it hobby-based necessarily? I don't know if it is. And for the record, I do keep a couple of drives floating around here that are more global. They could be used on any operating system, although I am purely Linux now. There was a time I floated between all 3 operating systems. In fact, some of those, they are different file systems. We have to keep that in mind because I just downloaded a bunch of bank statements from some online accounts, and they downloaded perfectly fine on Linux, but they would not want to go onto the backup drive system. I'm like, what's going on here? Ah, yes, because I'm using a different file system. So I had to rename a few files, and that solved the problem. But that was because of file systems are different. You have to recognize Ubuntu or any Linux is not a drop-in replacement for Windows. It is different. Does that mean Linux is a hobby? No. It just means they're different. You can't drop in Ubuntu and continue to work your workflow like you're running Windows. But that doesn't make it a hobby. Now, he does mention here CachyOS, so there's just a couple references to Cachy in the article. Of course, this has become popular as well out there. And so Nathan had his own bizarre problems where his CachyOS refused to acknowledge his mouse clicks. I have no idea what that is, and they don't tell us about the computer. All my times testing out CachyOS, I have not had that problem. My guess, he was doing CachyOS with GNOME and Wayland. Okay, that's my guess, because GNOME is becomes sucky. That's kind of my thought. All right. But I don't know for sure. And he provides us no information about what is going on. So he's also hit with options paralysis, trying to choose between 4 bootloaders and 13 desktop environments. Oh, what a hobby. Just make a decision and go with it. You decide that one time when you set up your computer. And there is a default. You just go with the defaults if you have paralysis analysis, right? Or is that analysis paralysis? I think they call that analysis paralysis, right? Sometimes this is part of the appeal, the infinite customizability. Make it truly yours. Ubuntu doesn't throw customizability in your face the way Cachy does, but it's there if you want it, okay? He says down here, and this is where I think he gets into the hobby, he says, the problem, as he meticulously tweaks everything to using Obsidian, is that you're building a house of cards. One tiny thing in some seemingly inconsequential library or plugin could cause the whole system to crumble down. I don't want to be wasting my time tweaking and troubleshooting when I already have things that work. So this is waving the white flag of surrender, but at the same time, okay, this is a guy who is choosing to go through a bunch of customizations to use a particular program a particular way. All right. If you are so caught up with, I just have something that just works. Well, what if you just kept your system the way it was installed out of the box? It wouldn't have taken so much time, but you also wouldn't risk it breaking. Because, you know, don't forget, it's Windows that broke Notepad, not Linux. It is Windows that broke the terminal, not Linux. Okay. So he goes on here. If you keep it as simple as I did, you're on XPS, you're hardly guaranteed smooth sailing. Ubuntu is one of the best supported Linux distros, and while my specific XPS is not one of them, Dell has many Ubuntu certified laptops, so I figured I was on the clear. Again, the XPS may have had problems with Linux. So stop blaming Linux for you having one piece of hardware that is messed up. And this, I'm thinking, the more I read the article, the more I think it was the XPS that I was looking at and chose intentionally not to buy it because it had compatibility issues with Linux. That is not Linux's fault. Linux runs flawlessly on millions and millions of systems, but my Dell XPS, what does this person have? Main character syndrome in his life? He's like, it doesn't work on my computer, therefore it's a hobby and it sucks. What is wrong with you? Okay. So he says, you know, downloading snaps or dead packages quietly failed to install. No obvious errors, no nothing. Had to open the terminal and install them from there to see what was wrong. Installing software on Linux is somehow even more confusing than it was 20 years ago. Yes, if you're using Ubuntu. because Ubuntu is intentionally screwing with things, which is why most of the Linux users are not using Ubuntu anymore. Everyone's still citing statistics from a decade ago stating how everyone's using Ubuntu. Dude, I've encountered a couple people in the wild using Ubuntu. Most people I talk to in the Linux world don't use Ubuntu. It is the old vestige. It was the old stable supported system back until about a decade ago. And then it chose to go off left field somewhere, doing weird things with packages, weird things with desktops, weird things with servers, weird things in behind the scenes. And then the rest of us are going, I didn't switch to Linux to have a corporate operating system. And they chose to go in a different direction. Because I run my life full time. I have Endeavor OS. I have MX Linux on a Raspberry Pi. I have Linux Mint on this streaming computer we're recording this on and on 2 separate laptops. I have Cubes on one of those laptops as well, dual booting. I have another old MX Linux that is so old, it's still running a Linux kernel branch 4, okay? It doesn't touch the internet, don't worry. But it runs flawlessly. I have all of this hardware around here that gives me 0 problems anywhere. But he's doing this whole article about how much Linux is just a hobby operating system because he's using an unsupported computer and a distro that has dropped out of favor because it walked away from the philosophy of free and open source software. Very interesting indeed. What do I mean by that? Is Ubuntu free and open source? Yeah, you can still access the source code. Yes, you can still modify it, but it has gone much more corporate. Maybe that's a better way to go. Ubuntu is doing corporate-y things. Fedora tends to be doing corporate-y things. Debian looks like it's doing corporate-y things. But all these other distributions over here going, I just want to have a really good Linux distribution like Linux Mint, even though it's based on Debian and Ubuntu, somehow they've worked the bugs out. Okay, I just looked at Linux Lite, that's worked a lot of bugs out. MX Linux, I have no idea how Run with the Dolphin gets MX Linux so good. It is shockingly good. There's voodoo magic in the background of that thing. I can't figure it out. But it's like, it is run with every printer and scanner I've ever thrown at it. I mean, it's just like solid, never had a problem. It's weird. MX Linux is so solid. All right. There are fewer problems on MX Linux than I've had on Linux Mint. It's just that I like Linux Mint a little bit better. All right. But all of these things, and then not to mention all the different servers I run and stuff like that. He does mention over here Steam and, installing out-of-date 32-bit libraries and crashing along the way. Is that Linux's fault? No, that would be the game developer's fault. Linux, though, with Steam has been working to greatly improve it to the point where now, I think that last statistic we saw was like 80 or 90% of all games run even better under Linux than under Windows. And they're Windows games, for crying out loud. So to me, it seems like this is a guy that is being very salty about an operating system that doesn't work because he's using an operating system that went corporate, is using a backbone of a desktop that has a lot of modern fundamental problems on a direction that is not going well on a computer that is not particularly well supported. Linux is not a hobby. I mean, it can be if you want it to be, for sure. But for me, tinkering with computers is not a big hobby for me. I am busy writing books. I am busy doing these videos, advocating for free and open source, for privacy, for things like this. I am busy running servers. I am busy running websites for clients. I am busy with a lot of things like that. I don't sit around tinkering with my computers, getting them working and keeping them working like a house of cards. I get them functioning, and they tend to function. The only weird problem I've had on Endeavor is one Arch package seems to be broken, and so I just hold it back on updates these days. Okay. But just to give you another reminder of, obviously, distro watch is not like the true taste of what everybody is using. But if you remember back in the day, Ubuntu was always number 1. Ubuntu is now number 10 and falling in number. And if Ubuntu gets beat out by Anduin OS, I will mark that as the death of Ubuntu. Yeah. Anduin OS, of course, is doing well because a couple of big guys like Mental Outlaw and Some Ordinary Gamers have featured this in videos saying, wow, this is amazing. It's by a Microsoft engineer. It's by a Chinese national who's a contractor for Microsoft. All right. And we did some analysis into that. So, be aware of that one. I really would. But look at this. CachyOS. This is one that has been talked about greatly. This is an Arch build that allows you to build your system the way you want it. If I were rebuilding an Arch computer right now, I'd be using CachyOS. It has so many useful tools in it to make it good. Obviously, I like Linux Mint for the stability for my main production work computers, because I don't want to deal with the fact that, yes, it is possible that Arch could break something a little bit easier than Linux Mint would break something. So I use Linux Mint. Curiously, that is my number 2. Number 3 is MX Linux. Yes, I use that one because, well, there's no Raspberry Pi version of Linux Mint. MX Linux provides one, so I use MX Linux on a Raspberry Pi. Debian is still up there. Pop! OS, good choice. Zorin is up there. Endeavor OS, this is also in the top distros. We have Manjaro still beating out Fedora a little bit, not by much. And then Ubuntu's on its way down. And it is holding on to that top 10 list just by the skin of its teeth right now, with some of these other ones potentially kind of on the way up. And so when we look at an article like this that we just looked at, this is a guy that used Linux under Ubuntu at a time that Ubuntu was really doing really good things. Ubuntu has gone more corporate. It's relying on other people to do the desktop environments. The desktop environment they're using seems to have a lot of problems, as illustrated on problems with Fedora and with and I notice I have not seen the problems with Fedora, but I haven't used it enough to know for sure. I have seen the problems on Debian. The modern tales with a modern GNOME, abominable. Let me know if you've experienced it yourself. And then, of course, there is Ubuntu's using the same platform. So we get these types of features, and if you want to really do a good test of Linux, see what people are using now. CachyOS, Linux Mint, MX Linux, Pop! OS, Zorin. Try it on one of these before you do another article about how Linux is just a hobby because your generally unsupported PC is not running Linux well. Interesting thoughts. So just kind of to illustrate the point that I've been saying here, here's actually a post from 2024, June 2024, so about 18 months ago, on Dell's actual forum, too many bugs with Linux Ubuntu. And this is a Dell XPS 139340 set up with Ubuntu 22. Never had a bad experience before. Never had a bad experience before, but now everything has too many bugs. And he lists the number of bugs, which we're not going to read through that whole list. But this is problems with the Dell XPS. So this guy says, I'm seeing a lot of the issues under Ubuntu 22 on the Precisions system that he's seen here. Recent firmwares have just made the situation worse under Ubuntu 22.04. This guy says, I'm with you. Very slow to unlock. I think it's related to the fingerprint driver. When I disabled it, it was quick, but haven't tested it properly. So again, these guys are all just explaining problems. Notice they're all running Ubuntu 22 or 24. Okay, they're all running an XPS, and they're all seem to be having problems. So that's what I mean by, and there's other articles, several other articles out there. I know Dell does make a Ubuntu available with the XPS for sale, but there do seem to have a lot of problems with it. And I personally think it's because the underlying GNOME desktop environment, I really think that might probably be the issue. Let me know what you think about all that in the comments down below.